Imperial Knights are among the most iconic and revered models in Warhammer 40k, both for their imposing stature on the tabletop, as well as the rich lore that casts them as noble, near-mythic warriors, piloted by members of ancient feudal houses. Their towering frames and detailed armor are a canvas for hobbyists, inviting intricate painting and kitbashing to reflect the honor, the history, and the heraldry of each knightly house. Now, in the lore, Imperial Knights are powerful relics of a bygone age, symbols of humanity's lost technological grandeur. And within that, they're freeblades, rogue knights who break from tradition, embody tales of tragedy, redemption, and personal valor in a universe defined by relentless conflict. Within this context, freeblades are knight pilots who have abandoned their noble houses, choosing to wander the galaxy as independent warriors. Each freeblade has a unique story of separation. Some are driven from their families by disgrace, others by tragedy, or a revelation that severs their loyalty. Freeblades renounce the tradition-bound duties of their house, becoming outcasts and exiles with no master to serve. They still pilot the colossal knight war machines, but they paint over their house's colors and replace its heraldry with symbols of their own. Freeblades are both revered and feared. While their loyalty to the Imperium often remains, their independence and unorthodox ways make them figures of suspicion among the nobility, and even among the Adeptus Mechanicus, who see their detachment as a potential threat to Imperial stability. This kind of outcast and exiling nature, where freeblades have no master to serve, is a path that echoes the history of the Ronin in feudal Japan. Ronin were samurai who lost their lords, either through death, disgrace, or by a conscious choice to reject their lord's command. Much like freeblades, Ronin became outcasts in a society that valued loyalty and service to one's lord above all. However, while Ronin were often seen with suspicion or even disdain, they could still act as protectors or mercenaries, taking on personal oaths and living by a code that differed from that of the typical samurai. Ronin could become fierce defenders of the people, wandering the land as master-class swordsmen who retained their honor and skills, even as they carved out a path apart from the rigid system of feudal loyalty. For both freeblades and Ronin, this separation from their original bonds creates a profound loneliness, but also an opportunity for personal transformation. Miyamoto Musashi is one of the most iconic figures in the history of Ronin in Japan, embodying the ideal of the masterless warrior who pursues a path of self-mastery and spiritual depth beyond loyalty to any lord. His life and teachings transformed the Ronin archetype from that of an outcast to a respected symbol of independence, adaptability, and the pursuit of inner enlightenment. Musashi was an undefeated swordsman who fought over 60 duels, famously defeating some of Japan's most skilled warriors. He pioneered a unique two-sword fighting style and technique that became a cornerstone of Japanese martial arts. His journey evolved from one of martial dominance to a spiritual pursuit of enlightenment. In his later years, he embraced Zen principles and engaged in creative arts like painting, poetry, and calligraphy, aligning with his belief in self-mastery and the way. In his later years, Musashi documented his philosophy on combat and self-mastery in the Book of Five Rings, a work that remains influential in martial arts and strategy to this day. Musashi wrote the Book of Five Rings, or Gorin no Sho, in 1645, and is widely considered a classic text on martial arts, strategy, and philosophy. The book explores his approach to combat and self-mastery, emphasizing mental discipline, adaptability, and an understanding of the deeper aspects of life. It's divided into 5 chapters, each named after an element that represents different aspects of strategy and mindset. The 5 chapters are the Book of Earth, the Book of Fire, the Book of Water, the Book of Wind, and the Book of Void. Now, it is this last book, the Book of Void, that I am most interested in going deeper into, and you'll see how this relates to the setup for the kitbash I'm going to be sharing today. The Book of Void is the most philosophical, discussing the concept of emptiness or nothingness. Ironically, it is also the shortest, and many have suggested Musashi did not complete this book. He uses the void to represent the highest level of understanding, transcending conscious thought and achieving a state of pure, intuitive action. Musashi suggests that by mastering oneself and one's craft, a warrior can reach a state of mushin, meaning no mind, or emptiness, where action becomes instinctive and uninhibited by ego or overthinking. The void is about freeing oneself from attachments, preconceptions, and rigidity, achieving true clarity and spontaneity. The concept of the void, in the 5th chapter of the Book of Five Rings, also aligns strongly with principles found in Zen Buddhism, which deeply influenced Musashi. The void reflects Zen concepts of enlightenment, non-attachment, and mushin, or no mind. This convergence of samurai culture and Zen philosophy make Musashi's life and writings a unique blend of martial prowess and spiritual depth. Now, Musashi spent time as a hermit in a cave toward the end of his life, and this period was crucial for his philosophical and spiritual development. This retreat is often seen as the final stage of his journey toward self-mastery and enlightenment, a time when he distilled all he had learned from martial arts, strategy, and life into what would eventually become the Book of Five Rings. The cave where Musashi spent his final years is called Regando, which translates to the Spirit Rock Cave. It's located near the city of Kumamoto in the mountains of Kyushu, Japan. By the way, there's also an epic saga of a book, of a fictional version of Musashi's life titled Musashi, written by Eiji Yoshikawa, that is well worth the read. And a classic screen adaptation was also created in the 1950s called the Samurai Trilogy, directed by Hiroshi Inagaki and starring the famous Toshiro Mifune. Finally, an incredibly successful manga based on Musashi called Vagabond was written and illustrated by Takehito Inoue. Links to all these are in the description if you're interested in learning more about the life of Musashi and the culture around him. From a kitbashing perspective, I really like the parallel between the lore and the role of 40k freeblades and the iconic Ronin Musashi. It enriches the lore of 40k from my perspective, blending the mystique of the masterless knight with the archetypal journey of a warrior seeking meaning beyond the battlefield, carving a path that is both feared and revered. I have also chosen this particular direction for this kitbash to enter the results in the Grimdark Compendium's Forest Freaks painting competition. I have been a longtime fan and avid supporter of the Grimdark Compendium's work and influence over the grimdark painting aesthetic, so I found it irresistible to participate in this particular challenge. Here is the brief that the Grimdark Compendium gave. Muted rustling of leaves under heavy boots, damp smell of dirt and moss. Ever-present, distant sound keeps pounding in your head. Dum, dum, dum. Drums. The echoing vibration from behind the trees grows louder with each step taken. What awaits once you reach the tree line? Well, that depends on you. It seems you have stumbled over the roots and brooks, through twigs and shrubs, only to find yourself in this man-forsaken place. You may still be able to turn back, probably. Or you could persevere and look for the source of the sound. If you do, tell me what you saw, would you? All right. With that brief, let me share with you the story of my kit-bashed freeblade Ronin in the Forest of Freaks. The Legend of the Silent Knight. Imperial records once listed him as Kensei no Kage, a Cerastus-Atrapos class knight from the noble house Hachiman. sworn to defend their forge world and the Imperium itself. The knight and its pilot, Shinmen Raiko, were legends known for their relentless pursuit of Xenos threats and rogue machines. But centuries ago, after a cataclysmic battle that shattered his house and severed the ancestral bonds that defined him, Raiko abandoned his lineage and vanished. Rumors spread. Some claimed he had been corrupted, others that grief had driven him mad. In truth, that battle had left him disillusioned, not with his enemies, but with the unending cycle of violence that governed the Imperium. Over the centuries, stories began to circulate of a silent knight haunting the edge of known space. Each tale varied wildly. No two accounts agreed on his exact location or the time of his sightings, making him impossible to trace. Some spoke of him as a protector, clad in faded yellow-orange robes, appearing in times of crisis to defend the defenseless before vanishing back into obscurity. Pilgrims whispered of an ancient guardian, an angel in rusted armor who had renounced his oath to find a higher calling as a protector of those forgotten by the Imperium. Yet others told darker tales of a cursed machine spirit, a knight turned rogue, severed from his house and tainted by the warp, a living weapon, waiting to rise and sow dissent amongst the ranks of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The truth lay somewhere in between. Raiko's journey had become one of spiritual awakening, a path that led him to a distant forested world on the fringes of imperial control. There, among the ruins of a forgotten civilization, he encountered fragments of ancient knowledge, teachings from Earth's past that spoke of inner peace, truth beyond violence, and harmony within. Casting off his knight's armor plating and his own pilot suit, he donned robes and began to meditate, not as a warrior seeking conquest, but as a seeker of understanding. Over years of deep contemplation, Raiko's bond with Kensei no Kage evolved. He and the knight's machine spirit began to merge, their identities blurring in a union of body, mind, and purpose. The bond transcended the neural interface. Over centuries of meditation, Raiko reached a state of transcendence with the knight, until their consciousnesses were intertwined. Kensei no Kage awoke, not as a weapon, but as a vessel for Raiko's newfound purpose, a conduit for balance and rebirth. No longer a tool of war, the silent knight became a force of quiet wisdom, a guardian of universal balance. The forest where he sat became a mythic place, an ever-shifting sanctuary for pilgrims seeking refuge for enlightenment. Tales claimed that his teaching had been captured in fragments of text, a wisdom quietly spreading to those open to its message. But his peaceful isolation could not remain untouched. Rumors of his existence and teaching reached the ears of the Adeptus Mechanicus and of the Inquisition. To some within the Mechanicus, he was a heretic, a rogue who had formed a forbidden bond with his knight, defying the sacred laws of machine worship. Others saw him as the key to a hidden truth with the Omnissiah, a wisdom they desired either to control or to destroy. The Inquisition, wary of any influence beyond its reach, dispatched agents to investigate, yet few returned unscathed. Some claimed to have witnessed the Silent Knight rise in defense of his forest, while others spoke of a wrathful spirit unwilling to yield to those who threatened his sanctuary. Once a warrior, bound by duty, the Silent Knight now sits as a symbol of transcendence, a figure of mystery in a universe that fears what it cannot control. His story raises a question. Is his meditation the closing chapter of an ancient soul? Or the first breath of a new wisdom destined to challenge the Imperium's endless cycle of violence? Alright, given this video and model were created for a challenge by the Grimdark Compendium, I wanted to do something a bit different and add a section on the rationale, the thinking, and the work in progress steps that went into the development and painting of the Silent Knight. So I wanted to go with a knight that was both relatively rare in the lore and would create a really special and unique grounding for the freeblade context. So I went with a Cerastus-Atrapos knight. I like this particular knight because, one, the contrast of it becoming a freeblade Ronin is even more dramatic, given how closely tied to Mechanicus houses it is. And two, actually the structure of this model allows for maybe a bit more flexibility in posing than some of the squattier and shorter knights. That enabled me to take what typically, from a posing perspective, are iconic silhouettes of fighting and lunging and blocking kinds of knights to one that is dramatically in contrast to that. A knight, instead of towering and being formidable, is seated, is calm, and is static. From a kitbashing perspective, as you can see here in this time lapse, I then layered on not only priming colors, but also different layers of texture, from overgrown and organic foliage to shading and certain darker and lighter tones in particular areas of the model. And in kind of stark contrast to the very disciplined and static position of the knight itself, its armor is strewn about behind the knight, symbolizing his choice to kind of shed his warlike past. And this armor has been painted in a black color that represents the pilot's efforts to black out or cover any insignias or previous colors or iconography that happened before. Also, the trim has been kind of reduced to its raw steel that has caused it to also rust, and as a result of exposure to the elements, which symbolizes this kind of decay and abandonment of what the armor was intended to be used for in the first place. And if anyone from the Grimdark Compendium is watching, the surface variation and texturing on this armor came from the blistered metal weathering class that's available at Grimdark Compendium. Just bear in mind that you need to take some precautions when trying these techniques, so kids don't try this at home. But it has an incredible effect once you've gone through the steps. I also chose to black out the knight's banner and added faint kind of hand-scrawled notes and symbols to try to hint at the pilot's efforts to capture new fragments of wisdom and reflections. You'll notice that the knight's massive weapons are nowhere to be found on this model. And again, it's kind of this symbolic gesture of rejecting physical conflict. I even damaged the arm on the right, as you can see, leaving frayed wires and exposed piping, again to emphasize this abandonment of physical war. I also replaced the Cerastus-Atrapos iconic knight head with actually a carved wooden head of a meditative monk. And this is really, again, meant to symbolize a quite dramatic transformation, not just for the pilot, but also for the knight itself into a figure of contemplation. I made the knight's robes out of cheesecloth coated in Mod Podge, which helped to create and retain a texture of cloth, and then carefully weathered it and tattered it to give it that kind of ancient appearance and that sense of kind of age and humility. It also creates a punch of color in an otherwise very dark and earthy kind of color palette. I also took a crack at doing some object source lighting to cast kind of a warm yellow glow coming directly from the pilot. And you could see that the cockpit is open so that he is viewable and vulnerable to the outside elements. He's seated in a meditative position, dressed in similar robes that match the knights. And he's discarded his pilot suit, which lies on the ground in a pile just in front of the knight. I built the base to really represent or resemble an overgrown forest clearing, somewhere maybe near the edge of a cliff, that blends the natural organic elements that I use. So I used real roots, real branches and vines, real fungus, and actually real snail shells to give it a kind of element of reality and this natural overgrowth feeling. I also used a mix of varnishes from matte to satin to gloss, and tried to really construct something that was very organic in the way it evolved and the richness and depth of it, but also provided a nice backdrop to the more striking and iconic pose of the model itself. I hope you enjoyed this very special kit bash and painting for the Grimdark Compendium's Forest Freaks challenge. And as always, thanks for watching.